At 4:47 a.m. on May 11th, 1945, a wounded American private lay inside a thin canvas tent in the Philippine jungle, bleeding, exhausted, half awake. Just yards away, nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were moving silently through the darkness toward his outpost. Their mission was clear: overrun the camp and kill everyone before sunrise. The attack began without warning. No reinforcements, no heavy weapons, just one man with a rifle and seconds to react. What followed wasn't a firefight, it was a fight to stay alive. And by dawn, the enemy assault would fail for a reason no one on that battlefield could have imagined. At 4:47 a.m. on May 11th, 1945, Private John McKini lay inside his tent near Dingolan Bay on the island of Luzon, completely unaware that nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were moving silently through the jungle toward his position. He was 24 years old, had spent more than 2 years in the army, and came from a poor sharecropping family in rural Georgia with only a third-grade education. By that stage of the war, the Philippine campaign had already cost the United States over 60,000 casualties. On Luzon, Japanese units refused to surrender, launching relentless night assaults, dawn raids, and suicidal charges against American lines. To protect a vital supply route, Company A of the 123rd Infantry Regiment, 33rd Infantry Division, had established a small outpost near Dingolan Bay. Its primary defense rested on a single light machine gun position manned by 3 American soldiers. After completing a long shift on the perimeter machine gun, McKini stepped away and walked a few yards back to his tent, laying down with his M1 rifle close at hand. The jungle around the outpost was unnervingly quiet. Unknown to the Americans, Japanese forces had been observing the position for days, counting personnel, studying guard changes, and carefully planning their attack. Under cover of darkness, the assault force began to move. More than 100 soldiers from scattered Japanese units still operating on Luzon advanced through the jungle, armed with rifles, grenades, knee mortars, and swords. Their objective was brutal and direct: overrun the outpost, kill its defenders, and seize the supplies. The lead element slipped past the outer guard without being detected. It was commanded by Sergeant Fukutaro Mori, whose orders were clear: neutralize the first Americans in complete silence, using only bayonets and swords. By the time the main assault began, the perimeter would already be broken. Mori crept toward McKini's tent, close enough to hear the steady rhythm of the Americans breathing inside. One clean strike would have killed him before he could make a sound. But John McKini had been shaped long before the war by the forests of rural Georgia. He was the son of a sharecropper in Scranton County, raised in a family that owned almost nothing. He learned how to shoot before he learned how to read. By the age of 12, he could drop a squirrel at 50 yards with a .22 rifle, trap rabbits, and bring down deer. Hunting and fishing weren't hobbies. They kept food on the table when the crops failed. McKini enlisted at Fort McPherson in November 1942. Army records showed he could barely read or write, but they also revealed something else. He was one of the finest natural marksmen the instructors had ever seen. His qualification scores stood out, and drill sergeants noticed how he moved through wooded terrain: quiet, alert, instinctive. He had spent his entire life in places where a single mistake meant going hungry. In 1943, the 33rd Infantry Division deployed to the Pacific. McKini fought through New Guinea, survived the jungle, endured malaria and dysentery, and lived through everything the Pacific War inflicted on American infantrymen. By May of 1945, John McKini was no longer a new soldier. He was a seasoned veteran, quiet, disciplined, and known for doing his job without complaint. Among the men of his unit, 2 things were certain. He was the finest shot in the company, and he never slept without his rifle within reach. That habit was about to save his life. Just before 4:51 a.m., the silence shattered. Sergeant Fukutaro Mori tore open the tent flap and swung his sword in a diagonal arc aimed at McKinney's neck. In the darkness, he misjudged the distance. The blade struck the side of McKinney's head instead, slicing through flesh and severing part of his right ear. Blood splattered across the canvas as McKinney jolted awake to blinding pain, and the silhouette of a man standing over him, sword already rising for a second strike. He had less than a second to react. The second strike would not miss. In the darkness, McKinney's hand found his rifle instinctively. He didn't aim. He didn't hesitate. 24 years of survival and hunting instinct took over. He swung the M1 like a club. The butt slammed into Sergeant Mori's chin with enough force to shatter bone. The Japanese sergeant staggered, and McKinney swung again, crushing his skull with a second blow. Outside the tent, footsteps pounded through the camp, dozens of them, fast, organized. The main assault had begun. Blood streamed from his severed ear, his head rang from the sword strike, and somewhere in the shadows, nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were moving in to kill everyone in the outpost. McKinney grabbed his rifle and stepped out of the tent. What he saw froze him in place. The machine gun position, just 30 yards away, manned by 3 Americans when he had left it to rest, now under immediate threat. Muzzle flashes tore through the darkness as screaming echoed across the perimeter, the sharp crack of Japanese Arisaka rifles blending with the heavier thunder of American M1 Garands. From the northeast, Japanese infantry poured through the line in organized waves. The first wave had already reached the machine gun emplacement. In the shifting light, McKinney could see bodies struggling around the gun pit. His mind assessed the situation instantly. That weapon was the backbone of the entire defense, covering the primary approach to the camp. If the Japanese seized it and turned it on the perimeter, they could cut down every man in Company A within minutes. McKinney broke into a sprint toward the position. The 2 soldiers who had replaced him were fighting desperately. Private James Hendricks had been struck by a bayonet in the opening seconds of the assault. Seeing Hendricks go down, the third man made a split-second decision. He grabbed his wounded comrade and dragged him toward the rear of the perimeter. It was the only choice. Hendricks would have bled out if left behind. But the decision came at a cost. The machine gun position was now completely exposed. By the time McKinney reached it, 10 Japanese infantrymen had already swarmed over the sandbag emplacement. One began trying to turn the gun against the Americans, while the others secured the perimeter, rifles raised for any counterattack. McKinney didn't hesitate. He didn't slow. No cover, no backup, just him and the weapon the entire outpost depended on. Charging straight at the 10 enemy soldiers, bleeding from a head wound, he was a blur in the pre-dawn shadows. 2 raised their rifles, but McKinney was faster. He fired, dropping the first man at 15 yards. A second shot echoed across the camp, felling another at 10. By the time McKinney reached the sandbag wall, he had already fired 4 rounds. 4 Japanese soldiers lay dead. He vaulted into the cramped gun pit, roughly 8 by 6 feet, with 6 enemy soldiers still alive. Some swung rifles wildly, others reached for bayonets, and one fumbled with the machine gun's traversing mechanism. McKinney landed among them and continued firing at point-blank range. The M1 Garand held 8 rounds. He had already used 4. The next 3 shots dropped 3 more enemies within inches of him. Only 1 round remained. The 8th soldier lunged, bayonet aimed straight at McKinney's chest. He fired, and the man collapsed. The Garand's bolt clicked back with its metallic ping, empty. 3 Japanese soldiers were still alive inside the gun pit. The metallic ping of the empty Garand had reached their ears. They knew it meant McKinney had no more bullets. But he didn't pause. He flipped the rifle in his hands and swung it like a battle axe. The walnut stock slammed into the first man's temple. He crumpled instantly. McKinney struck again. The second soldier raised his forearm to block, but the rifle shattered bone and continued into his skull. The third lunged with a bayonet. McKinney sidestepped and brought the rifle down on the back of the man's neck, the vertebrae cracking audibly. In just 30 seconds, 10 Japanese soldiers who had overrun the machine gun were all dead. McKini grabbed the weapon, breathing hard, ready for what was coming next. His hands gripped the receiver, but something was wrong. During the struggle, the machine gun had been damaged, the bolt was jammed, the feed tray bent. He cycled the charging handle twice. Nothing. The weapon that had been the heart of the perimeter was now useless. McKini looked up. Dawn was breaking, painting the jungle edge in gray light. And there they were, more Japanese soldiers, regrouping for the next wave. He had only his M1 with an empty magazine, his ears still bleeding from the earlier strike, and the main assault had barely begun. Quickly, he scavenged a bandolier of .30 caliber ammunition from a fallen enemy, likely taken from a previous American position, and loaded a fresh clip into his rifle. Somewhere in the darkness, a Japanese officer shouted orders. McKini couldn't understand the words, but the urgency in the tone was unmistakable. They were coming again. He settled into the gun pit amid the bodies of the men he had just killed, resting his rifle on the sandbag wall, waiting. 60 yards out, the second wave emerged from the jungle. McKini counted at least 20 soldiers in the front line, more pressing from behind. They charged at a run, rifles leveled, bayonets fixed, screaming into the pre-dawn shadows. He brought the M1 Garand to his shoulder, lined up the first target, and squeezed the trigger. The weapon barked, and the lead soldier dropped at 60 yards. McKini shifted his aim. The second man fell, then the third. Each shot of the M1 kicked hard against his shoulder, brass casings spitting to his right. He didn't think. His body remembered thousands of hours spent in the Georgia woods. Lead the target. Squeeze the trigger. Acquire the next target. Repeat. The clip clicked empty with its sharp metallic ping, and McKini slammed a fresh one from the bandolier into place. In the time it took to reload, the charging wave had closed 20 yards. 40 yards now. He opened fire again. The Japanese had expected to encounter a captured machine gun, ready to sweep them down, but instead, they faced a single American systematically cutting them down. 8 rounds, reload. 8 more, reload. Some attackers made it as close as 15 yards before McKini brought them down with unerring precision. Some of the attackers tried to veer left or right, searching for cover. McKini tracked each movement, pulling the trigger with deadly accuracy. Any soldier who moved became an easy target, something he had learned hunting deer back home. The second wave finally broke, survivors scattering back into the jungle. He counted the bodies before him, 11 more, bringing the total to 21 since the attack began. There was no time to feel relief. Japanese officers were already shouting orders beyond the trailing. And then he heard it, a hollow thump from deeper in the jungle. A knee mortar round exploded 10 yards to his left, dirt and shrapnel spraying across the gun pit. The second round landed closer. The third slammed the parapet, showering him with debris. The enemy had learned from their previous waves. They would not charge blindly into his fire again. The Japanese weren't done. Their plan was clear. Soften the position with mortars, force him down, then send an infantry to finish him. McKini assessed the danger instantly. If he stayed in the gun pit, the mortars would eventually zero in. Yet moving risked losing the only fortified position in this sector. A grenade landed 3 feet from him. He grabbed it and flung it back over the sandbags. It detonated midair, the blast knocking him sideways. His ears rang from the noise, and blood from his severed ear soaked through the makeshift bandage pressed against the wound. Another mortar round slammed into the sandbags, partially collapsing the wall. Half exposed to the jungle, he made his choice. Staying meant certain death. He grabbed 2 bandoliers of ammunition from the fallen enemies, slung them over his shoulder, and ran. Japanese rifle fire cracked from the tree as they spotted him moving. Bullets snapped past his head as McKini sprinted 15 yards to a shallow depression, a slight dip in the terrain, no proper foxhole, just enough to give him cover. He threw himself down and rolled onto his back, dirt kicking up inches from his face with every shot. Crawling to the edge, he found a firing position. The Japanese infantry was moving again, believing he was retreating. Two squads emerged from the jungle at a fast walk, rifles raised, heading straight for the abandoned gun pit. McKini waited 30 yards. Then he opened fire. The soldiers had bunched together while crossing open ground, a deadly mistake. His first shot dropped the lead man. The second hit the soldier behind. The group scattered, but there was no cover between them and his new position. He picked them off as they ran. 8 rounds. Reload. The survivors reached the gun pit and found nothing but bodies, their comrades from the first wave. They had expected to find the American there, ready to be suppressed. Instead, he was firing from an entirely different angle. 3 more fell before they could even locate his muzzle flash. McKini shifted again, moving 10 yards to his right, while the Japanese scrambled to regroup. He dropped into another shallow depression and opened fire once more. This was instinct, what he had learned hunting in the Georgia woods. Never stay in one place. Never let your target anticipate the next shot. A deer might freeze at 1 gunshot, but 2 from unexpected directions would make it run in circles. By now, the Japanese were doing exactly that. Dawn light spilled across the sky. McKini had been fighting for 18 minutes straight. His ammunition was running low, and his ear was still bleeding. Through the shadows of the jungle, McKini spotted movement, enough to know the enemy was massing for another major push. He needed more ammunition, and he knew exactly where to find it. The bodies of the fallen Japanese around the gun pit carried more than just 30 caliber rounds. Some had Arisaka rifles with full pouches, others grenades clipped to their belts. McKini waited for a lull in the mortar fire, counted to 3, then sprinted across the open ground toward the gun pit. Rifle fire erupted from the tree line. He ran in a zigzag pattern, a bullet tugging at his sleeve, another snapping past his ear. In the last 5 feet, he dove, landing among the bodies he had left 20 minutes earlier. The smell hit him instantly: blood, cordite, and something darker, the metallic tang of death. He ignored it and moved quickly. McKini had spent his life butchering hogs and gutting deer under the scorching Georgia sun. The scent of blood and death was nothing new to him. He moved with lethal efficiency among the fallen, stripping every bandolier, scavenging every loose clip he could find. For American ammo pouches, likely taken as trophies, added 64 more rounds to his belt and pockets. Suddenly, a shadow crested the sandbag wall. A Japanese soldier, advancing while McKini gathered supplies, rifle already rising. At just 2 feet away, McKini fired, striking the man square in the chest. He snatched the grenades off the fallen soldier's belt, 3 Type 97s, and mentally ran through the procedure. Pin, strike the cap on something hard, count to 4, throw. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement. More enemy soldiers emerging from the darkness on his left, closing in fast. McKini armed a grenade, counted carefully, and hurled it over the sandbags. The explosion tore through the darkness, followed by anguished screams. He armed a second grenade, aiming it toward the tree line where muzzle flashes flickered, and the blast sent more enemy soldiers screaming into the chaos. Before the third grenade even left his hand, he was already moving, running again, seeking a new position. Keep moving. Dawn had lightened the sky enough to see clearly. 15 yards from his previous depression, McKini dropped into a shell crater 3 feet deep, offering solid cover from direct fire. From this vantage, he could observe the entire approach from the jungle to the perimeter. The ground was strewn with bodies between him and the trees. He counted quickly. 28, maybe 30. Some were still moving, wounded men crawling back toward their lines. McKini let them go. A single wounded man required 2 healthy soldiers to carry him. Every casualty McKini created multiplied the enemy's problems. The mortar fire had fallen silent, and he knew why. The Japanese had lost sight of him. Without a clear target, their gunners couldn't adjust fire. He had 15, maybe 20 minutes before they repositioned observers. McKini used the time to reload every empty clip he carried. His fingers moved automatically, pressing rounds into magazines, testing spring tension, 8 rounds per clip. He had scavenged enough ammunition for roughly 10 reloads, 80 rounds. 80 rounds against however many Japanese were still hidden in the jungle. The attack had lasted 23 minutes. McKini had killed or wounded at least 30 soldiers, but he knew the numbers were against him. The Japanese had started with roughly 100 men. Even if half of the enemy had fallen, that still left 50 men, and McKini was completely alone. Where was the rest of Company A? The answer was complicated. The Japanese attack had hit multiple points along the perimeter at the same time. McKini's position was on the northeast flank. Elsewhere, soldiers were locked in their own desperate fights on the south and west sides of the camp. The company commander was scrambling to coordinate a defense, but in the chaos and darkness of a night assault, coordination was nearly impossible. McKini didn't know any of this. All he knew was that no one was coming to help him. No reinforcements, no supporting fire, just him, his rifle, and the bodies stacking up before his position. At the edge of the jungle, the Japanese regrouped. Through the trees, he could see soldiers checking weapons, NCOs moving among the ranks, and officers studying the American perimeter with binoculars. They had expected to overrun this outpost in 5 minutes. They had lost nearly a third of their force to a single man in just 23 minutes. And still, they hadn't broken through. The Japanese officer lowered his binoculars, and McKini caught the subtle gesture, a pointed indication at a section of the perimeter he wasn't covering. Not the gun pit, not the craters where McKini had been slaughtering them, but the supply tents. A fresh approach, a new axis of attack, meant to bypass the deadly ground he had carved out. McKini understood immediately. They were swinging around his flank, aiming to strike the camp from a direction beyond his current reach. And from where he was, he couldn't stop them. He had a choice: stay in his crater with cover and clear lines of fire, or move to intercept a threat he might never reach in time. Without hesitation, he climbed out of the shallow depression and sprinted toward the supply tents, 40 yards away. The Japanese commander had thrown his reserve force into the flanking attack, 20, maybe 25 men. They hesitated at the edge of the jungle, wary of the deadly scene unfolding before them. That pause was fatal. McKini opened fire on the clustered soldiers. 8 rounds. Reload. 8 more. Bodies fell among the trees. The survivors melted back into deeper cover. 26 minutes into the assault, McKini had killed or wounded at least 35 enemy soldiers. The Japanese had tried 3 approaches: a frontal rush on the machine gun, a mortar bombardment followed by infantry, and a flanking maneuver toward the supply area. Every single one had failed. One man had shattered their plans. The commander faced an unprecedented problem. His intelligence had warned of only a small American force with minimal heavy weapons. Standard doctrine dictated overwhelming night attacks. Speed and numbers would compensate for any defensive advantage. But one soldier had turned the doctrine on its head. Reports from his men told a chaotic story. Heavy fire erupting from multiple locations, muzzle flashes from the gun pit, then from a depression 30 yards away, and finally from behind the supply crates. The Japanese believed the Americans had established overlapping fields of fire, multiple riflemen covering one another from fixed positions. That conclusion was wrong, but it dictated their next move. Mortar crews shifted to the southwest and began walking rounds into the supply area. McKini heard the first explosions and reacted instantly. He knew staying still invited death. Static positions drew mortar fire. Movement kept you alive. He ran north along the inner edge of the perimeter and spotted a foxhole recently abandoned by a soldier sent to reinforce the southern line. McKini dropped into it. This one was deeper than any position he had used so far, nearly 4 feet down, with a firing step that allowed him to see and shoot over the rim. The Japanese infantry attacked again, this time coordinating from two directions at once. One element advanced from the south, while another pushed in from the original northeastern approach. The tactic was designed to split his attention, to force him to commit to one threat and expose himself to the other. McKini refused to choose. He fired 4 rounds into the southern group, dropping 2 men, pivoted immediately to the northeast, fired 4 more, and dropped 2 more attackers. The M1 Garand locked open with its metallic ping. He slammed in a fresh clip in less than 3 seconds and went back to work, sending fire into the southern group again until their momentum collapsed. The advance stalled. Neither element could push forward through the relentless rifle fire, yet neither pulled back. Instead, they dropped low and began firing in return. Bullets snapped inches above McKini's head, rounds punching into the dirt and sand around the foxhole. Fire was now coming from 2 directions at once. His ammunition was thinning, and worse, the enemy was adapting. The Japanese had finally understood what they were facing. Not a squad, not layered defenses. One rifle, one man who moved fast and rarely missed. That realization changed their tactics immediately. The mass charges stopped. They began advancing one at a time. One soldier moved while the others covered him with suppressive fire. Then another advanced. Then another, leapfrogging forward, closing the distance step by step. It was a method built to break a lone defender. No matter how skilled the shooter, no one could track multiple threats moving independently from different angles forever. Sooner or later, one of them would get close enough. McKini understood exactly what they were doing. He had seen it before in the Georgia woods. Coyotes hunted the same way, spreading out, approaching from different angles, forcing their prey to fixate on one threat while the others closed in unseen. Now, he was the one being hunted. 31 minutes into the fight, the Japanese had crept to within 20 yards on the southern side and 15 yards to the northeast. He had fewer than 30 rounds left. The foxhole that had kept him alive was turning into a trap, a place where he would eventually be pinned and killed. McKini refused to wait for that moment. He exploded out of the foxhole and charged straight at the nearest enemy position. 5 Japanese soldiers were crouched behind a fallen palm tree 15 yards away, waiting for their comrades to close in from the opposite direction. They never expected their target to attack. McKini fired while still running, dropping the first man. He shot the second as he reached the log. The third soldier surged up with a bayonet, but McKini sidestepped and smashed the rifle but into his face. Bone cracked. The man collapsed. The fourth soldier swung his rifle like a club. McKini dropped under the blow and slammed the steel but plate of his M1 straight into the man's throat. The fifth tried to flee. McKini put a round into his back from 3 yards out. He didn't slow down. He couldn't. To stop was to die. The men on the southern approach had seen him abandon the foxhole and were already charging. McKini turned and fired. 2 fell. He fired again. Another dropped. Then the rifle went empty, the sharp metallic ping cutting through the chaos. 3 Japanese soldiers reached him before he could reload. The first wrapped him around the waist and drove him to the ground. His rifle was knocked from his hands. The second stomped down on his wounded ear and white-hot pain tore through his head. The third raised a bayonet for the finishing blow. McKini grabbed the ankle of the man, crushing his head, and twisted hard. The soldier lost his footing and went down. McKini rolled free of the man, holding him as the bayonet stabbed into the dirt inches from his chest. He scrambled to his knees, snatched up his rifle, and swung it in a wide arc that smashed into one man's temple. The soldier crumpled. McKini reversed the motion and drove the butt plate into another man's ribs with everything he had. He felt bone give way under the impact. The third soldier had already ripped his bayonet free from the dirt and lunged. McKini caught the thrust on his rifle barrel. Steel scraped along wood and metal, carving a deep groove into the stock. McKini stepped inside the blade's reach and drove his forehead into the man's face. The soldier reeled. McKini smashed him twice more with the rifle, but until he stopped moving. 33 minutes had passed since the attack began. McKini was gasping for air now, his hands slick with blood, some of it his own. His ear was a torn mess of flesh and dried gore. His uniform hung in rags, his body marked with bruises and cuts he couldn't remember taking. But he was still standing. He scanned the battlefield. Bodies lay everywhere, Japanese soldiers who had charged an American outpost and found something they never expected. In the cold gray light of dawn, there were more dead than he could count. Then movement caught his eye. 2 more figures slipped out of the jungle to his right. McKini brought his rifle up and felt the hollow truth. It was empty. He hadn't reloaded after the hand-to-hand fighting. The 2 soldiers froze when they saw him standing alone among the bodies of their fallen comrades. That hesitation sealed their fate. McKini charged. He covered 10 yards before either could react. The first man tried to shoulder his rifle. Too slow. McKini drove the rifle butt up under his chin and felt the impact shudder through his arms. The second soldier turned and ran. McKini was on him in 3 strides, smashing him down from behind. 34 minutes. Then he remembered the mortars. He had seen their muzzle flashes earlier, firing from the southwest, hammering his positions throughout the fight. If those crews were still alive, the threat wasn't over. He found a serviceable rifle among the dead, an M1 with a full clip, dropped his battered weapon, and moved toward the mortar site. The crews spotted him as he approached. 2 men, scrambling in panic. One reached for a rifle. The other fumbled with a grenade. McKini fired from 45 yards and dropped them both before either could act. 35 minutes into the battle, he stood in the growing morning light, scanning the jungle for movement. His chest heaved. His vision swam from exhaustion and blood loss. Every muscle burned, demanding rest. But the jungle remained still. No more soldiers emerged. No more mortars fell. The attack was over. There was no more rifle fire from hidden positions now. Only the low moans of the wounded and the faint buzzing of flies already settling on the dead. McKini turned and walked back toward the American perimeter. He was halfway there when movement caught his eye. Figures approaching. American uniforms. Soldiers from Company A who had finally fought their way through to his sector. They slowed, then stopped, staring at the blood-soaked man walking toward them, carrying a rifle that wasn't his, standing amid bodies scattered across the ground. McKini lowered the weapon. The reinforcements took in the scene, the shattered machine gun pit, the trail of corpses stretching from the jungle to the perimeter, the single soldier at the center of it all. 36 minutes after Sergeant Fukutaro Mori had slashed open his tent, Private John McKini was still standing, still breathing, still in full control of the ground around him. The fighting was over, but no one there yet understood what had truly happened. The men who reached him that morning were from 2nd Platoon. They had been engaged on the western edge of the perimeter when the Japanese assault began, and it took them 36 minutes of hard fighting to break through to McKini's sector. What they discovered there was almost impossible to process. Bodies were scattered across an area roughly 100 yards long and 60 yards wide. Japanese soldiers slumped over sandbags, folded into shell craters, sprawled among supply crates, piled together near the shattered machine gun emplacement. The platoon sergeant ordered a formal count. His men moved methodically through the ground, checking bodies, marking positions. It took 20 minutes. When the count was finished, the sergeant refused to accept the number and ordered it done again. The result did not change. 38 Japanese soldiers lay dead around the machine gun position. 2 more were found near the mortar emplacement 45 yards away. 40 confirmed kills in an area defended by a single man for 36 minutes. The sergeant finally located McKini sitting quietly on an ammunition crate. The private was holding a blood-soaked bandage against what remained of his right ear. His uniform was shredded and dark with stains, and the wooden stock of his rifle was cracked from repeated blows against human bone. He looked like a man who had passed straight through hell and came out the other side. When the platoon sergeant asked what had happened, McKini gave a simple account: the tent, the sword attack, the machine gun, the repeated waves of enemy soldiers. He spoke in short, clipped sentences. There was no exaggeration, no emotion, only facts. The sergeant did not believe him. No single soldier could kill 40 men in 36 minutes. It was not possible. There had to be other defenders, other riflemen supporting his position. Perhaps the private was disoriented from blood loss and combat shock. But the roll was checked. Every other man in Company A was accounted for. The two soldiers who had originally manned the machine gun with McKini had been evacuated to the rear with wounds. All others had been engaged elsewhere along the perimeter. And the physical evidence, the bodies, the shell casings, the firing positions, matched McKini's account exactly. Spent M1 rifle casings were scattered across the ground at the exact locations McKini had identified. The wound patterns on the Japanese dead aligned precisely with the firing angles from those positions. One man, 40 confirmed kills, 36 minutes. Company A's commanding officer forwarded the report up the chain, first to battalion, then to regiment, then to division headquarters. At every level, the same assumption was made. The account had to be exaggerated. Combat reports often overstated enemy losses. Confusion, darkness, and stress distorted memory. The numbers could not be accurate. The 33rd Infantry Division dispatched an intelligence team to investigate. They questioned McKini, interviewed witnesses, examined the battlefield in detail, and conducted another body count. Some testimony suggested the true number of Japanese casualties may have been far higher, possibly exceeding 100, but only 40 deaths could be conclusively linked to McKini's actions. After reviewing all evidence, the investigators reached a conclusion they could not dismiss. The report was true. Private John McKini had single-handedly stopped an assault by roughly 100 Japanese soldiers, and he had killed 40 of them himself. He had saved his entire company from near certain annihilation. In June 1945, a recommendation for the Medal of Honor was submitted. The Medal of Honor is the United States' highest military decoration, awarded for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. Fewer than 3,500 have ever been bestowed since the Civil War. The criteria are exacting. The recipient must distinguish himself through conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at extreme personal risk. McKini's actions met and exceeded these standards in every measure. The recommendation progressed through the chain of command. War Department reviewers examined the evidence, confirming what the division investigators had already concluded. The account was true, every detail corroborated by witness testimony and physical proof. On January 23, 1946, Private John McKini stood in the White House as President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. The official citation detailed his heroism, extreme gallantry, unsurpassed intrepidity, single-handedly thwarting an assault that could have destroyed his company. McKini did not deliver speeches. He simply accepted the medal, a silent testament to what he had achieved. He never sought the spotlight. When reporters asked about the battle, he offered the same brief account he had given the sergeant that morning on Luzon: the tent, the sword, the machine gun, the waves of attackers. The press dubbed him the Pacific's Audie Murphy. Murphy had earned his Medal of Honor by single-handedly holding off German forces in France. McKini had done the same against Japanese forces in the Philippines. Both faced overwhelming odds. Both refused to retreat. Both survived through a combination of skill, courage, and something that defied easy explanation. Yet while Murphy became a Hollywood star after the war, McKini returned quietly to Georgia. He was just 25, armed with a Medal of Honor, a third-grade education, and a partially severed ear that would never fully heal. The war was over. The killing was done. John McKini had to learn how to be a normal man again. In 1946, he returned home to Scrubbing County, Georgia. He returned to the only life he had ever known: farming, hunting, fishing in the same creeks where he had learned to shoot as a boy. He rarely spoke of the war. Neighbors knew he had received the Medal of Honor. They had seen the newspaper articles, but McKini never mentioned it, never displayed the medal, never attended reunions, never gave interviews. When asked about Luzon, he offered a few words and then changed the subject. The nightmares, however, were another matter. His family knew. The sounds he made in his sleep, the way he would wake suddenly, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Those memories followed him home in ways no medal could ever touch. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not a recognized diagnosis in 1946. Veterans struggling with combat memories were simply told to forget, move on, and be grateful they survived. McKini did what most men of his generation did. He buried the memories and kept working. He married, raised a family, held various jobs around Screven County. Years passed. Korea came and went. Vietnam followed. New wars forged new heroes and left new veterans with hidden scars. McKini remained in Georgia, living quietly, aging quietly. The Medal of Honor rested in a drawer somewhere. He had earned the nation's highest military decoration, yet most of his neighbors never knew. In 1965, author Forrest Bryant Johnson embarked on a mission to uncover the story of John McKini. A veteran himself, Johnson understood the hardships and horrors McKini had endured. For years, he tracked down surviving witnesses, sifted through scattered military records, and painstakingly reconstructed the events of those 36 fateful minutes on Luzon. The task was daunting. McKini was reluctant to speak, and many first-hand witnesses had passed away. Records were fragmented across multiple archives, yet Johnson pressed on, driven by the belief that this remarkable story needed to be told. His dedication culminated in the 2007 publication of Phantom Warrior, a book chronicling McKini's early life in Georgia, his service in the Pacific, and the legendary battle that earned him the Medal of Honor. The book shone a long-overdue spotlight on a hero most Americans had never known. McKini, however, did not live to see his story reach the public. He passed away on April 5, 1997, in Sylvania, Georgia, at the age of 76. The sharecropper's son, the man who had single-handedly slain 40 Japanese soldiers with his rifle and bare hands, passed away quietly, surrounded by his family. He was laid to rest in Screven County, close to the very land where he had learned to hunt and survive. 2 decades later, Georgia paid tribute once more. In 2017, the state legislature voted to rename a portion of highway in Screven County, the John R. McKini Medal of Honor Highway. A ceremony marked the occasion. Veterans stood in respect. The McKini family accepted the honor on behalf of a man who had never sought recognition for his deeds. Today, the highway sign remains. Drivers pass it every day, oblivious to the story etched behind the name. They do not know about the tent and the sword. They do not know about the machine gun or the 36 minutes of relentless combat. They do not know that the quiet farmer who once lived nearby had single-handedly saved an entire company through an act of courage and violence that still defies comprehension. 40 men in 36 minutes. 1 rifle. 1 soldier. 1 morning in the Philippines that should have ended in massacre, but instead ended in something extraordinary. Private John McKini never asked to be a hero. He was a farm boy who joined the army because the world was at war. He did what he had to do to survive and to protect the men sleeping beside him. Then he went home and tried to live a normal life. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is John McKini. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do a small favor. Hit that like button. Everyone likes YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every day, we are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives. Tales of farm boys and ordinary soldiers who saved lives with rifles and bare hands. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Are you in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the globe. You're not just a viewer, you're helping keep these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring John McKini's story does not fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and with your support, they will be.